Okay. Oh my gosh. Whew. Okay, we did it.
We did it?
Yeah, I think we're in now.
Awesome.
Whew.
And if we have this much trouble, I mean, there's a lot of percentage of the world
Okay.
that stands no chance. So that makes me feel a little bit
Oh
better.
my gosh. Whew. Okay, we did it. Oh.
We did it?
Oh shoot.
Yeah.
Now I'm
we're in
hearing
now.
us
Awesome.
through.
And if we have this much trouble, I mean, there's a lot of percentage of the world
Okay.
that stands no chance. So that makes me feel a little bit
Oh
better.
my gosh.
Did you pull up the stream?
Okay, we did it.
Yeah, now I'm
Oh.
We did it?
frick, now I'm
Oh,
hearing
shoot.
myself.
Yeah.
Now I'm
we're in
hearing
now.
There we go.
Us.
Had to find the right window. Okay. Whew, comedy of errors, man. Like just so amazingly bad. I guess if you're watching, let us know if there's anything that you can't hear. I think if you end up having any questions, we'll probably reserve those to the end, because we're probably just gonna hang out for a little bit, but we'll try to tackle those at the end. All right, cool. Let's get set up. You are already recording your audio.
Yes.
Let's see, new recording. I'm gonna do that the same over here. Test 1, 2, killer. And then yeah, so I guess let's. I gotta take a breather.
Hey, give yourself a pat on the back.
Thank you. Yeah.
I
I'm
mean,
gonna
you've
do that
got
right
this
now.
cool blue background. Your shirt. I mean, your streaming game right now. I look like a scrub over here. I got 500 square feet to work with, man.
Okay,
So.
I'm gonna have to. We might have to address that in the talk, because I only put the light on because your production value for your shows is so high always. So I was, and the shirt. I had a T-shirt on. I was like, dude, Sam is. He's.
Oh man! And here I show up with my webcam. I don't even have my Sony hooked up,
man.
and I don't have my cool little accent light. You out-Sammed me right there, man.
I
You're just gonna do that? You're gonna do me like that? My first appearance? No, it looks great though. I've been having a lot of fun with like these YouTubers who are just like unbelievable. I mean, you can go to film school for free.
Oh
on
yeah.
YouTube these days. And
It's
just been
ridiculous.
so much fun, you know.
It's ridiculous. Okay, cool. So I think ARC, I think we kind of talked about this on Twitter, but we'll kind of cover it right now before we like actually officially jump in. But usually just say like, I'll just say hi, you say hi, and I'll probably talk. I was planning on leading in with some of your content creation stuff. And then I think the main thing is just talking about frameworks and stuff. And I apologize if I end up looking down. Your face is like right around here, so I'm actually, if it looks like I'm looking away from you, I'm actually looking at you.
Oh, okay, got you. That's okay. There's a
Eh,
chance your audio mic on Zoom is not your actual mic.
Thank you. Good call.
I can hear you just fine, but
You're right.
I've heard hundreds of hours of your silky smooth, that Shure mic in my ear. Oh, there we go.
Is this better?
Yes.
Awesome.
Oh, but now there's a little echo.
Ah, crap.
It's because
I've been having that through Zoom for some reason. I'm not sure why.
You can turn it back. At least I got a little taste of it.
Yeah, I hear that echo too. Why is that?
Is that on my? It wouldn't be on my end, would it? Because I have headphones.
Shouldn't
on,
be.
So. Bizarre.
Okay, let me try one more thing. I have one more trick up my sleeve.
Yeah, don't push it too much, because we're on the tip of an iceberg right now with all this. We're talking via space.
It is so, like, all this stuff is so fragile.
Yeah.
I don't know if this will be great, but it should be better.
Oh, that worked.
Yeah?
What'd
All right.
you do?
I have I think like you, I'm a little bit of a gear nut. I have a little kind of shotgun camera mic for my A6400. So I just plugged that back in and then changed it back to the Cam Link.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so you should be able to.
That's perfect.
Sweet. Yes.
It's like you're right in front of me. Even better, actually.
Right in front of you, no echo. Let me check. For anyone who's watching live, see if there's any complaints. Okay, it looks like we're good. Okay, cool.
Awesome.
Awesome. So yeah, and then I think the rest of the time we'll probably just like maybe just kind of complain about like, or I guess, reminisce about the old days of making software. And
Sounds good to me, man.
talk about how hard it is now.
Yeah, some things have gotten easier, and then some things have definitely gotten harder.
Yeah,
Sometimes yeah, it's really funny because you're like, oh, I can sign in now, and you like jump for joy, and then you realize this is something that should be easy.
Yes.
When you have 3 services talking to each other, it feels like you've accomplished something.
Yeah, I mean, sign in specifically is just like such a disaster.
Although right before this, I was working on adding auth to my site, and I pushed a button on Firebase, so that was pretty cool.
Maybe okay.
Talk about that. This is kind of the back and forth of this whole thing.
Right? Yeah. Let's do that. And then, is there anything that you want to like pitch? I think there's probably so many things that we could talk about, but if there's anything that you want to like kind of talk about that you're working on, make sure that everybody knows about at the end, even if it's unrelated, we should do that.
Nothing, man. We can just hang out. Okay. I mean, right now we're like really in an exploring phase in terms of like what our next big thing that we're going to work on is.
Cool.
And so mostly I've been like trying to go all in on YouTube stuff. So that would be
nice.
That would be like the thing that would be like my call to action, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. We'll definitely point people to the stuff that you're making and the show and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, cool. That's a good idea.
Yeah. Does the YouTube channel have a name right now?
YouTube.com/Sam Selikoff.
Okay, cool.
And then frontendfirst.fm is our podcast.
Yeah, front end first. I love it. Okay. Okay, cool. All right.
Sweet.
Cool. This will be fun. I'm ready. So we'll probably we shoot for about like 45 minutes. I mean, sometimes we overshoot it. We rarely undershoot it. So sometime around like 2 would probably be about the time that we'd ideally wrap up, but we'll see how it goes. Or 2 PT. All right.
The only thing I have to do after this is go get a drink with my friends. So that's all I got. That's all I got on my itinerary today.
Perfect. All right. So in 3, 2, 1. Sam Selikoff, welcome to React Podcast.
Chantastic. Do people just not even know your name because they just see you and they say chantastic?
I try really hard to avoid actually using my name. I don't know where that came from, but like I do, and I'm always surprised when people online actually call me Michael. It's kind of weird.
It's weird.
Like I expect my family to do that, but then everyone else is just like it's like Chan or like Chantastic, and
cool.
It feels almost like a violation, right? When someone's like, "Hey, Michael," I'm like, "What?"
Yeah.
Are we related?
And you see Chan or Chantastic. So Chantastic. Awesome to be here, man. Thank you so much for reaching out. I've been meeting you. Actually, we've had some interactions online over the years. But this is the best we got during COVID, but this is pretty cool. So it's awesome to be here, man.
Yeah. Well, I'm super happy to have you on. And like you said, we've been kind of like on the edges of each other's circles for a while, and it's been fun to talk more with you lately. But I think like we were trying to figure this out like before we actually started the call side or like the podcast part of this, but it was like somewhere around like Ember, like original Ember Conf days is maybe when we were like kind of around each other's spheres. Is that right?
Definitely. So like I got basically into programming around 2012 and was in Boston and found Ember through Dockyard.
Yeah.
And, that's kind of when I went all in on Ember for a while. And around that time, Ryan Florence and then like folks on JavaScript Jabber, like Jameson and all these people. And I think you were in that crew, like you all kind of knew each other, like Brandon Hayes, like all these people kind of knew each other and were writing about front-end JavaScript online. We're like circling around, and I got in just like a year late, and I never saw a lot of those people at the actual conference, even though I've had lots of interactions with them since online. So it's kind of funny. Like the world felt a lot smaller back then,
Oh man, yes, absolutely. It truly did. It felt way smaller. Like, so I'm trying to think, was it 2013? Was that like the first EmberConf, or was that 2014?
I think like, I think probably Ember 2012 was like Ember Camp or something. And so maybe the first Ember Comp was 2013. And then the second one, which was my first one, was in 2014, I think. Something like that.
Oh, man. Yeah, it's true. Those feel like the days. It was like, I feel like back then it still felt like front end was this thing that like just a handful of people really cared about. Like there were a bunch of nuts who like really wanted to like make really great user experiences and wanted to build applications kind of from, you know, flows or components first instead of building them from
Yeah.
like the database first. And
Yeah.
that was fun.
Yeah, totally. It was fun. It was like it was a mix of like the wannabe native UI developers who like were envious of like all this really cool UI tech that was coming out, because it had only been like 4 or 5 years with the iPhone out. And so
Yes.
it's funny, it feels like so old long ago, but I still feel like I'm a new front end development developer just because I don't know, things change fast
Yeah.
and there's so many technologies. But you had those people, but then you also had these people with this really deep background doing open source web stuff. And so, a lot of really bright people in this space, and that's really what attracted me to it.
Yeah, yeah. Now I want to talk about your like style because I feel like even back then you had incredible production value and like all your stuff. We're going to talk about like you know your podcast and your YouTube channel and like all the stuff that you're doing. Um, but like you've always had a really distinct look. I remember seeing some of the first like Ember map videos, just being like, this is amazing. Like this is exactly what like educational content like should look like. They're just these quick like little like snippet videos. They're incredible.
Yeah.
So like what I guess you said you got into programming around 2012 and I'm curious like what your background was before that that kind of positioned you to do that kind of like really cool like visual stuff that you've been doing.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate the kind words, man. Thank you. I before I fell into programming, thought I was going to be a professor, and so I've been basically teaching most of my career.
Oh, nice.
Most of my life. I mean, starting with like working at Kaplan and tutoring the GRE in college, and then up through thinking I was going to be a professor going to grad school. So a lot of this has been like me trying to figure out how to make a career out of teaching,
Hmm.
and I love the web and the fact that we can reach so many more people than like academic economists can reach writing some obscure journal article
Yeah,
for
yeah.
10 other people in the world. So the video stuff is just, I just felt like that was some of the most effective ways to reach people and to communicate these ideas. Um, and then I guess the quality thing is just, I don't know, it's just, I think one of the reasons I fell into front end development, like I learned programming, I started with Symfony and like Perl stuff, but then quickly really fell in love with JavaScript and Backbone and then Ember. And for me, it was because I like the design and the
Yeah.
polish and the UI and how that crosses over. So I always like polish, and I'm drawn to people who put a lot of effort into polish, and I feel like it speaks well of the other parts of the work that they do. If someone puts a polished product out there and they spend a lot of time on that, it is often a sign that they spend a lot of time on the inner sides as well. So yeah, that was always just kind of our my goal, and then eventually our goal when we started Ember Map.
It's really interesting that you say that we're like as front end developers, we're kind of like wannabe native developers, and I do think that's so true. Like, like there's this huge chip on our shoulder, maybe, and like it's like we always want to prove that like we can deliver like similar or better experiences on the web, and it just takes so much effort to actually make that happen.
Well, I mean, when you start doing this front end stuff, you get such an appreciation for the constraints that we face because
Yeah,
we don't have the luxury of starting out with 50 megabytes of code on the user's device. And so, when Ember started doing the server side rendering stuff, and Tom Dale was talking a lot at conferences about like bending this trade off curve between like the fast initial render and like the rich subsequent
yeah.
interactions. That's really where it kind of crystallized in my mind about how difficult this problem is. And the stuff with like Next.js these days is just like blowing my mind. So I feel like we are learning a lot, but constraints can be a good thing. And yeah, I think in a lot of ways we've come really, really far.
Do you feel like it takes kind of a certain personality to like want to be involved in this stuff? Because I think there is maybe this notion of like, well, if you,
Masochist.
yeah, like, are we a little masochistic, right? Because it would be easier if like if we really wanted to just make great UIs, like to just do them on like use Swift UI and like get a lot of stuff for free, and then really like obsess over the like the real the nitty gritty details. Whereas like for us, it's like we spend so much time just thinking about how to shave off like bytes and like how we're going to do that, like server rendering, client side
Mhm.
handoff, rehydration, all that kind of stuff. Like I don't know this. This is a very philosophical question, but like I'm curious. Like, do you feel like at the end of the day, it's like actually worth it, or is it something that we just get excited about it because we're maybe masochistic a little bit?
I think a lot of us are drawn to this because we feel like we have ownership in the direction of
Interesting.
innovation. And so a lot of the people are, writing the or contributing to the specification of how JavaScript evolves, or like new abstractions in the language that will help us with things like promises. Like I was started programming before promises were a thing. And then you think about distribution and ownership and just open source in general. Like I've never done native development, but people I've talked to say like the open source level of collaboration is just nowhere near what it is in web. So, the fact that I can just create a library in like one command, set up like testing on CI,
Yeah.
publish it to npm, and you can start using it, and it's like going to auto test and auto deploy. And we have version, like we think a lot about versioning and how to share code. I think all of that stuff makes us take ownership in it, and that's what we're drawn to about it. And like, yeah, maybe if you were just optimizing for like fastest time to polished UI, following Apple's guides and using Swift UI might give you an incredible experience. But I think because we're kind of like builders, we see ourselves like builders,
Yeah.
and like we're shaping the future of it. So I think that might be part of it.
That's absolutely fascinating. That sounds right on to me. Like to be honest, like, and I think that some of these closed platforms, it's like like a like Swift UI or Apple devices and whatever. You're really making a product, but you don't have any ownership over like how it's made necessarily. Like you can customize it and tweak it and maybe like ask for certain things at WWDC every year.
Right.
But you're right. There is a level of ownership over like the web and like standards, and it feels kind of, spunky. Even though it's been around for a really long time, it feels a little bit more like punk rock and raw, maybe.
Yeah. And like I do love Apple. Like I'm a huge Apple fanboy.
Yeah,
Like
same.
and so I love the idea of like a polished product that's like closed in a sense for the sake of convenience and for the
Yep.
sake of like interoperability. But there is something about the open source stuff that I also really love. And I learned so much at the beginning of my career through open source. I
Mm.
realized very quickly that open source is the best way to level up as a developer,
Yeah.
because all the best practices just bubble to the top. Like
Yeah.
bad practices can't really withstand, thousands of developers looking at them. So if the question is how to organize code or how to do testing or how to build a 12-factor app, blah, 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 like you're just going to learn all this stuff. And then if you're at a company that doesn't do this stuff, you're just going to like zoom ahead of them. And
Yeah.
so, that was just, and I just learned so much from, Yahoo Cats and all these other leaders in the OSS world that, that's kind of why I fell in love with it. So it'd be tough for me to it'd be interesting to give Swift UI a try and all that stuff. But there's just so many cool people in like web tech, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally, I 100%, I 100% agree. But I do wonder that sometimes, eh, like, do I like the pain? Like, is that what draws me to this
to a
problem?
fault.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I am.
I mean, certainly we are guilty of like, wheel reinventing or thinking like the smallest problem with an existing abstraction makes the
Yeah.
whole thing not worth it. And we need to start from scratch as opposed to just, moving forward to more together. And so, but, you also can never know when like the next really good abstraction with like a really clean boundary that
Yeah.
we're going to build upon is going to come next. So I don't know. Innovation is messy.
It is. It is. It takes all types, right? Like it takes these people who are kind of like really want to be like close to the metal, and then also people who are just like so far out, like to really kind
Mm-hmm.
of like define the next patterns that are going to be, kind of like trickle down.
Right.
Um, Now you've been doing a lot online, and I want to make sure that we kind of like properly shout out to all of that because I actually today I took a little bit of extra time because I was like okay, Sam's production value on like his podcast and YouTube and his like videos and stuff are like just so good. like I'm gonna have to like turn the light on. I'm gonna have to like fire up like the camera, put a shirt
Oh yeah.
on.
And then I show up here just with my webcam on because I'm in this mode, man, for the last month because of COVID. I've been like, I'll be honest, I was about to say half checked out. I'm basically completely checked out. I'm maintaining things and I'm working on things, but it's been a good summer to relax a little bit.
Yeah.
And so I do not have everything set up here because I had just pulled down all my lights and stuff. But
Yeah.
yeah, I appreciate the shout out.
Well, I hear you, man. Like I've been I thought like kind of when COVID started, I was like, okay, now's my chance. Like I'm pretty introverted. Like we're just gonna like I'm just gonna just crush stuff right now. And like no, it's like the opposite. I could
Oh
barely
man.
get motivated. And it's like I'm just playing like I got super into Destiny, the like video
Nice.
game from I don't know,
I got
like
into
10 years
Witcher
ago.
3. I sunk like 100 hours at the beginning of COVID into Witcher 3. It's completely absurd. And we all think we're introverts until we're literally not allowed to see anybody. And then you realize just how much of an introvert you really are. And
Totally. Yeah,
but
it's like I feel like I picked up the video game habit just so I could like hang out with friends and stuff. It's
yeah,
like, yeah, it's crazy.
Destiny is awesome though. But yeah, like a month ago, the restaurant was kind of half opened here in New York. And
Yeah.
so I've just been like getting away from the computer as much as I possibly can. I know there'll be plenty of time to come back, but yeah, need beach time,
Yeah.
need fun outdoor New York time. It's been beautiful here, so yeah.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about I know that you have some really cool videos on YouTube that have explored your process of kind of going from, you know, Ember and learning all the things that you need to know to build sites with Next and that kind of stuff. And you've been covering some similar topics on Frontside FM or sorry,
Mhm.
Frontend First.fm. Frontside.
Front
That's
side. That is the you just triggered a neural
yeah.
connection
It was
because of the company from Brandon and Chris.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
I was like, why did that come into
back in Ember days.
my
That's
brain? It
great.
was just like they were like linked and the
Those are good guys though.
good guys, really
Real
good
good
guys.
guys.
Yeah, so
But
front end
yes,
first, you've been kind of covering some of these same topics and just kind of really, in a really fascinating and kind of like illuminating way, talking about your experience actually building these things and coming from, you know, like, you know, more full stack frameworks like React or even like fuller front end frameworks like Ember.
yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that process, kind of like the things that you want to explore and share in those videos and podcasts.
Yep. So yeah, me and my business partner Ryan and friend Ryan Toronto, we run embermap.com, and that's still going on today. We still make videos, and we have plenty of customers over there still learning Ember and all the new stuff coming there. But about a year ago, we actually decided to work on moving one of our open source projects, Mirage, to make it framework agnostic.
Hmm.
And so in doing that, we wanted to kind of get some reps in with React and Vue and Svelte and just try out these things. And we had over the years, like vicariously by like following you guys and Michael Jackson and Ryan Florence and all these folks, because we had that shared background. They did have the Rails background or the Ember
Yeah.
background, and so they would kind of make those connections there, and so that made it really easy. And so a little more than a year ago, when we started really diving into it, it was just about, yeah, like let's see what it's like to really build something and try to expose that learning process, and wanted a way to share that. And naturally, like, we've been making videos for 3 years, so I was like, yeah, I'm just going to start putting these on YouTube basically, and just I've just been having fun with it. So I started doing that, like, I don't know, earlier this year, probably a little after COVID started. Um, yeah, so that's basically the story. And some of the videos are like technical tutorials, but some of them are just like reflections that I've had coming from a more batteries included
Yeah.
side, and also seeing how my experience with something like Ember and the architecture that it gives you has influenced how I build React apps, because a lot of it I just carry over. So I
Yeah.
feel like in a lot of ways, Ember gave me a head start on React. I was talking about this with some folks at a conference, like before I really started going heavy on learning React. And I was like sitting at this table with like these React developers. Folks had been doing it for a while, and they were good. And like they were like talking about how frustrating it was to get like routes working and to get your state synced with routes. And routing has always been one of Ember's big strengths. In fact, it was like one of the talking points when they first started, was they were like evangelizing how important the URL was to the web.
Yep.
And in Ember, like they kind of nudge you very heavily towards like building route-based applications,
Yep.
whereas especially in React in the earlier days before things like Gatsby and Next had those conventions for you, or when you would have to like use React Router on your own and understand it, a lot of folks would say, "Oh, I just like can use the state to like show a login component and
Yeah.
otherwise show a home component." Then you're like, "Well, you can't send a link to a login component." And then like there's all these ramifications, right, for how you're thinking about structuring your app. So that's one example of like 100 that I could go through where just thinking in terms of how Ember architected things helped me navigate this really complex, sometimes fragmented world that React is in, right? While still being able to learn these smaller primitives.
It's really fascinating because the way you talk about it has a lot of reverence, and I feel the same amount of reverence as well, right? Like I feel like, Rails did a really good job of kind of like connecting. I've always said it, like it does a really good job of kind of like connecting HTTP to like a database, right? Like that's the beauty of Rails, is that kind of like honored both of those things and then built a framework around that idea. And
Mm-hmm.
Ember really protected, more than anything, like the public service of Ember was to protect the importance of the URL. And
Mm-hmm.
you've said that, and I remember feeling that way as well. Like just feeling like, yes, like the URL is still important. Like we have to hold on to this thing. It can't just be like a slash and then like all of the state
A
just
whole app, yeah.
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 And I think that is critically important. And frameworks like Ember like actually provide that for you, and they provide the mechanisms to think about your application in those terms, like and I still think about things in the Rails, like
Yeah.
show, new, create, destroy,
Right.
like those
Right.
actions, right?
Resourceful nouns,
Yes.
there's so many lessons that carry over. I mean, a lot of times the way I think about this stuff is just like in like product development startups, which is like bundling or unbundling, right? If you hear people talk about new companies, it's like you're either bundling or you're unbundling. So that's all it is if you think about it. So like what's an example of like a really good, like Gmail is like the interface and the chat and the to-do app. It's all right there.
Yep.
And then like things comes out and it's just you're unbundling one feature from Gmail and you're building a company around it, right? And
Interesting.
then you have lots of this unbundling happening, and then people like that there's a tool that does one thing very well. But then there's a fragmentation, and you start feeling the burden of like, oh, I use things for my to do and this for my chat and this for my video and this for my email. What I really want is one place. So then you have like a Slack come on, which is like a rebundling where it's
Yeah.
pulling in chat and file sharing and posts and stuff like that. So in a lot of ways, you can simplify like, product development in just the general marketplace of like as like bundling and unbundling. And I think the same kind of thing happens in tech where Ember was trying to bundle together a lot of the ideas because we were frustrated with the fragmentation of, oh, I need backbone, but then there's no like rendering layer. So
Yep.
I'll use this cobbled together with jQuery UI, and then I need a model layer. So I'll use like Marionette or something. So like we're frustrated because it's too unbundled. Ember comes along, bundles it. We like that they're talking about these ideas and solving the whole problem. But then like in some way, this is like an oversimplification, but in some ways, Ember was like right in theory and wrong in practice. Like
uh,
it was too ambitious. It like took on so much that there was such a big surface area. People would get frustrated when they ran up against those walls. And then so we see an unbundling where React comes out is just the view layer. Okay, now let's solve the state layer. It's Redux. Okay, let's start the routing layer. We have React Router or different ideas there. And so and then Vue comes along and it's like kind of rebundling
yeah,
things,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And now Next and Gatsby are kind of bundling things as well. So I just think you will just keep seeing this, and but things get better over time, like
Yeah.
because those boundaries are more clear,
Yeah, it is interesting. I to be honest, this is the first time I've actually heard that term of like bundling and unbundling, and probably because I'm not like really connected with like the business side, or like Silicon Valley like products and whatnot. But it's super fascinating because I feel like we've all felt that, and a lot of people who are attracted to Vue, it's because it is more batteries included, right?
They don't want to make so many decisions. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I can definitely empathize with that. But at the same time, like having come from, it's almost like wherever your starting point is, right? Like if you like really love a band, it's like your favorite album is the band that like you got introduced like to.
Yes.
And I feel like for a lot of us who've been like doing this for a while, it's like kind of like for all of its faults or whatever, like I still love Rails, right? And like I
Yeah.
can't not think about things in terms of Rails. And it's hard for me to imagine like how would you even build an app, without concepts of like, collections lists, and
Yeah.
show
Yep.
pages. Um, and yeah, it is interesting how there's this kind of like cyclical nature to these things where it's like, you bundle them together and then you have to pull them apart and then you bundle them together again. And it's always kind of usually like in service of some type of maybe new construct or new like idea that needs to be brought to life.
Yeah. I think I mean, I'm a huge fan of Rails too, and I think DHH does a really good job of being clear
Yeah.
about his values and articulating like
Mm-hmm.
why he does the things he does.
Yeah.
If folks are interested in this part of the conversation, I made a YouTube video called React as a Programming Language for UIs, where I basically talk about this because when I started learning React, I was frustrated that I felt like I was using a tool that was way too low level for building an app, and I wanted something that was going to get me farther faster. But I think if you go back and look at why React was created and the problems it was trying to solve and the values of the people who work on React, it starts to make a lot more sense.
Sure.
So I'm like you. I share a lot of those values that DHH has talked about, the Apple-like values of like a cohesive story. But honestly, like really over the last year of just trying to let go of some of those biases and like really just like let myself say, okay, what if it's going to be lower level, but like you have these moments where you have a reference point in the past where you're working on a Rails app and like you're typing like this Rails DSL to like get something to work, and you're not coding.
Yeah.
You basically can build a Rails app without coding.
Yeah.
It's like a DSL for building apps, and you just look at the docs and you do it, and it's incredible how far you can get without knowing how anything works.
Yep.
And when you listen to Sebastian, Mark Beige, or Dan Abramov talk about React, that's not how they think about React at all. They actually say like Dan said this thing that he said, I like hooks because they actually expose more of what React really is. So the idea is like we want to give you more power and give you like sharper primitives because while higher level APIs can be more powerful and let you do more without understanding it, there are those times where you run into those cases you have no idea what's going on and you're like, I just want to write some code,
Yeah.
So that was the idea behind that video anyways, but I see it come up again and
Yeah.
again, and I have that resistance in myself where I say, why isn't this just done for me? Like, why isn't there a 404 page built in and I have to learn how to do this? Like, Laravel is another example. Laravel came out of, who would have thought like a new PHP framework would come out
Right.
and
Not
have
me.
more like popularity than Rails in like the 2010s, but again, if you listen to the values of Taylor, they're going to sound a lot like the values of DHH, and it's very batteries included. So I think it's important to understand the values of the people that made the tool that you're using and understand the problems it was designed to solve, because that's going to be how you get the most out of it.
I think it's really interesting that you mention Laravel because it's so true. I think that like anything that you're like really passionate about, there's going to be other people that are passionate about it. And like I would never have guessed like a PHP framework in the like 2010s to like now would be like so beloved. And it is.
Oh yeah, it's great. I want to be a PHP developer just because this community is really awesome, and I'm like, I've never even written a line of Laravel. The last line of PHP I wrote was like Symfony, whatever version I was on in 2011 or 2012, I guess. And but it's really cool. It's they have the values, but they have the execution on the values as well. So it lines up.
Yeah. Now, Sean Wang, Swix online, he kind of talks about how, and I don't know, I don't know if he was just like retweeting this or whatever, but I know that I heard it from him, this idea that, React is a very like low level type of library. And we're starting to see like distributions almost of it. So you have like
Mm,
Next, you have Gatsby, you have like other things that are kind of like taking that low level thing and actually turning it into a framework. I guess, you know, like Blitz and Redwood are also kind of
hmm.
like in that space where it's like we're trying to make more and more of that. Or I guess to use the language we've been talking about, like rebundling, right? And
Right,
using
right. It's
React
like
as
bundling them.
part of that. Yeah. Um, and I'm kind of curious, like, how do you feel about like some of the things that have been coming to place? I know that you've been using Next a lot. Like, does it get you? Does it feel like it strikes the right balance, or would you still like to see more of those like concepts, kind of like you know Rails has, like the really strict application design concepts?
Yeah, I think my perspective on this over the last 7 years has changed. I think at the beginning I believed more of this idea that if you don't tackle the whole problem, then you aren't going to be able to solve it altogether.
Mm,
So your data library needs to understand your routing so that you can do the caching right. And so when you visit a route, the data layer or whatever knows that it's already been there and it can reuse the query and all this stuff. And there are benefits you get when all the pieces know more about each other. But
mm,
I think the big shift in my thinking here has been that it's like design by like top down design is like very hard, and
yeah,
this stuff is very hard, and like finding those correct boundaries is difficult. So I think I think those higher level APIs are still the goal, but I think the way to get there is through lower level tinkering and experimentation. And so um for me, like, it's been a big shift, but in the last year we've done like client work, and we've built like miragejs.com with Gatsby, and then I've also been doing a lot of Next. And I think me of 5 years ago would have been like, oh, Gatsby's great. Like, I need to bring something in. I just install Gatsby plugin. Boom, it works.
yeah,
And Next makes you learn all this code and all these things you have to do, which feels like they should come out of the box. But recently, you're also kind of catching me at the height of my like Next fanboyism right
oh,
now,
sure,
because I've
sure,
just had some amazing experiences, and they've been shipping like insanely awesome
yeah,
features so fast. So you know, uh, things that would have frustrated me about working with a tool like Next, um, now I'm like, no, this is right. Like, they
yeah,
are, they're doing these smaller things, and it's very clear like what their domain is, and what they consider part of their responsibility and not. So like, Gatsby has like an image component that helps you like serve images. Like, Next doesn't have that, but it's like, again, past me would have been like, why don't you come with a nice image component? But now it's like, Next is focused on like helping you architect your app in a way and fetch data in a way that's going to make it fast and like help you scale up and not run into like a lot of issues that people who have been building
yeah.
SPAs for years have. And that's like what they're tackling. And so there is like a React image component library out there, and you can find it. And yeah, would it be nice if it was just like part of Next? I guess so. And maybe one day it will be, but that's like the trade-off that they're making. And I think it's a good one.
Yeah, yeah. Now, what do you think of? And I don't have a lot of experience with this, but I know that there's some kind of nascent frameworks out there, kind of that build on top of Next. I think Blitz is one of these, and it kind of
Yeah.
tries to marry, you know, Next as like, again, like kind of like a stepping stone, a lower level like thing with some higher level concepts, you know, brought in a lot from Rails. Um, does that sound like at the place that you're in right now? Does that sound kind of like interesting to you, or have you been enjoying owning more of the problem than when you were working with something like Ember?
I think I've been enjoying owning more of it, and the Blitz stuff and the Redwood stuff. We talked to Tom on our podcast from Redwood, and it's interesting. We went through the startup guide and did feel kind of like doing a Rails app, but like, you have Prisma, you have like a database stuff. Like, also, I'm in this point where like I don't want to write backend code anymore, man. Like, I've written too many like request specs and controller code for
Yeah, yeah,
Rails, and like that always feels like the most menial, like least value added part of my job. And so,
yeah,
we had like a really amazing experience with Firebase a couple years ago, and so these days I'm like going back into that and learning about Hasur and seeing how far I can get without writing a line of backend code. So that's one part of it, but the other part is just like, again, I think the higher level point is like going back to like being humble about what we know and what boundaries we think are right, and not trying to not trying to bite off too big of a part of the problem,
yeah,
because it's just really hard. And so I want to bet on things that are clear about their boundaries and that have a good community and that aren't trying to overreach maybe. Community is so important in open source
Yeah.
and what tools you choose, because the community has a huge effect on how long lasting it is, how it's going to grow over time, whether you're investing in something that's going to last. Um, so for me, a tool like Next feels like a much more appeasing like bet thing to invest my time on, because I mean they're having like a conference now, and
Yeah.
it's there's a company that's backing it, but it's also, again, it's like those boundaries that it has. It's solving one part of the problem very well, and you can see how it fits in with the rest of the pieces. So
Yeah, yeah. It's funny, like as much as I love Rails and would totally use it for a project, there's a class of things that like I kind of like the free, like you're talking about. I like the freedom of being able to solve the whole problem in Next. And like, yeah, maybe sometimes you shoot yourself in the foot, but that freedom is also kind of like exciting in a way.
yeah, I think the other thing about Rails that for me like uh, counteracts some of these forces is the fact that it's used to power Basecamp, which has been around, and
Yeah,
and it's not going anywhere, and it's a big app that they work on all the time. So I'm a big believer in this idea that like the best open source is extracted, not
yeah,
designed. So when people try to architect something from up high on the clouds and they come down with a tabernacle of the new framework that's from their mind as opposed to from boots on the ground
yeah,
experience, I color me skeptical, right? So um, Redwood I think is being used for their new startup, which is cool. um, but it's still new.
yeah,
Whereas like Rails was literally extracted um, years after they started,
yeah,
and and then again also investing in that community. So I think if there was a bigger tool, but it was like I mean that's one of the reasons why React is so robust and why
yeah,
it nailed the boundaries, because it went through all these iterations early on. It's like, oh, we've been using this at Facebook for years.
yep,
Let's share it with you. It's not going anywhere,
yeah.
and so on. So I think that's another one of my values that I think is important that I've gotten from some of these, open source leaders, is like the value of code being extracted rather than designed.
Yeah, and I think that brings up an interesting point is that, sometimes choosing a framework based on who is it, like what product it's being extracted from, is not a bad place to start. Like if you're building a business or whatnot, like if you have a business that looks like Basecamp, like building something on Rails is gonna maybe be like a pretty good bet, versus like if you're building a
GitHub,
social
yep.
network, like you know maybe React and GraphQL is probably going to be your best bet because it's like, battle tested for exactly that use case.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this goes back to like the idea of there being no silver bullet and understanding what problem the tool you're using is solving.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. I'm curious, like, so I know that Ember has had concepts of like components and whatnot as well, but I'm kind of curious, like, what has been some of your biggest struggles, actually building something with Next? I mean, is it like figuring out the data layer and having to like own all that? You mentioned Firebase and Hasura and all
Yeah.
that. Is it auth? Like, what are some of the big struggles that you find when building full stack applications, with React Next, however you're building them?
Yeah, data. I would say it's
Yeah.
100% data. I mean, the guides don't even tell you anything really about data fetching, which is kind of absurd. Like, that's just whatever. It really grinds my gears, I guess. It's like, I understand. I just said all this stuff about having the right boundaries and everything, but it's like, we still got to render data from a backend
Yeah.
somewhere, right? Like, servers didn't just go away. And if you look at the guides, for how to do data stuff with hooks, you find like a link to a blog post, and it's like, come on, guys, like, let's, can we get some like, I want to just see how you would do this
Yeah.
today. Like, I get that there might not be a first class thing here, but yeah, Ember has Ember Data, which is a separate library. You don't have to use it with Ember, but it's inspired by Rails, and it helps you think about domain modeling and
Yeah.
relationships. So like if I have a post with many comments, I can each over them, and it all works. I can think about how I would build that query when I came to React and I was finding examples or even helping folks and just looking at their code. That's where I was coming from, and I would see them doing lots of things like just rendering from JSON. And I
Yep.
knew what the problems were with that and why tools like Ember Data existed, and even like the JSON API spec, which is like something that came out of the Ember community as a way to like normalize data going over the wire. I didn't find a lot of people talking about this sort of thing in the React community. And there's like tools like Apollo um, that you know are more focused on domain modeling.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to jump to a tool. I wanted to understand how folks were thinking about it, or just yeah, I just I just feel like if you try to make like a to do app that like does crud on data, it's gonna look very different. So
Yeah.
like that's one thing for me where like if you get 10 React experts to make a to do app and they have to crud like to dos, I think it'll look very, very different.
Oh
Whereas if you
yeah.
ask them how to do like a toggle or like render something, they're going to be using state and effects in the right way. They're going to be thinking about that the same way, but we don't have that same shared vocabulary for data stuff. And I know a lot of the things that the React team is working on right now has to do with data, but I still think it would be valuable if there was more resources around like, okay, given that it is, September 2020, me, someone who works on React or, has used it a lot, this is how I would do a data fetching thing, right?
Yeah, yeah. That I mean that really does feel I think those are the two pains that I feel the most, right? I mean, especially like when you try to teach React, so many people want to know like, well, how do I do this like as a full stack thing? Like cuz I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people they get into programming or like UI development because they want to build a product, right? Like they have some type of app or like vision for the world that they want to like build. And the answer to that is like not clear. It's like, okay, well, I can teach you React, but like if you actually want to persisting leave this data, um, well, there's 500 ways you could do it. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, that's ridiculous. Like I think there should be I think the tutorial that someone starts with should optimize for like time to first persistence
mm,
operation. So like how fast can I get a React app creating a to-do so that such that I can reload the page or open it on my phone and see that stinking to-do that I created. And this is where like, well, this is why I've been so impressed with the next stuff is because it's actually easier than React because if you do data fetching in React, let's say you render the page and then you use an effect and it has an empty bracket, so it only runs once.
yeah,
It makes a fetch call to your to dos. You set some state and then you render from state and then you're off to the races. But like you have to understand the effect. You are rendering the first render is not going to have data. So those things are going to be undefined. You have to account for that. Um, in Ember, like Ember has this notion built in because the router is built into the framework of like I click a link, I load some data, and then I render. And that's like a very easy pattern to do. But if you want to do that in React, it's very hard. So you have to understand the use effect stuff. And again, this is where like getting more comfortable with the lower level primitives
yeah,
is important. But I think it could be like progressively disclosed better.
okay,
And in Next, you can export an async function, which is very convenient because data fetching is asynchronous. So it's actually nice to have like a
yeah,
first class concept of like, oh, this thing is going to take a while. Okay, here is an async function called get, static props, and you can say await, which is great, and you can fetch some data and return it, and then you can render your component with that data. So like if you were teaching someone to render a list of to-dos from a server, your next component or your next page with that get static props export and then your React component is going to just be so much easier to
yeah,
explain and understand than a React component with the use effect and all this switching and all this stuff. So and explaining how like to rerun the effect when dependencies change. Like again, it's not as capable because you're doing like a one-shot fetch on the
hmm,
server, let's say, but still it's like that progressive disclosure of
yeah,
complexity. You want to start with the simple thing and then say, oh, okay, now we want to add some interactivity, rich interactivity on the client. Here's where use effect comes in. So I think some of that stuff would be nice to have a more like official response on, and
yeah.
it would smooth that landing curve into React.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, admittedly, it is an incredibly sticky problem, especially the way we're trying to solve it, right? Where it's like you have, client and, server rendered stuff and like the rehydration and all that kind of, it's like, it's, it's non-trivial the way that I know that everyone wants to solve it. And but I do hope that like sometime soon, I don't know, maybe by like 2020 or something, we can we can actually tell people like, oh hey, it's actually really easy to build a full stack application with React now, right? Like we can here's how you fetch and post in like one article, because that would just be really a really really beautiful thing.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard problem. I mean, Ember data. was basically an attempt to bring active record from Rails to the JavaScript UI world, and the fact that it's an asynchronous place makes
Yeah.
it like just so hard. So then we saw all these different things coming out, and Redux and different ways to, MobX, different ways to think about mutating state and fetching data, and having a global cache that represents the data you've already fetched, and how to revalidate when things go stale. So it's a super tough problem. But yeah, so and like, not even to mention like relationships and all this stuff. Again, I think the next, again, the next approach of like doing the stale while revalidate thing is like, it's crazy how much complexity that eliminates from some of these solutions I've seen in the past. And I like that it was extracted from their work on their own dashboard. So
Yeah.
I just think that we have to do more tinkering and experimentation, and we'll land on good abstractions eventually.
Yeah, yeah.
Hopefully sooner than later.
It's funny because as you were saying that, I'm just thinking like, yeah, it's like you know, that's just the like the post and fetch part of it, right? That's not like the actual relationships of the data, which is like a totally different thing.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. In some sense, it's a really tough problem. In another sense, I do sometimes think like active record is like just an amazing piece of technology. I
It
mean, it
is,
really
yeah.
is the reason Rails is Rails, and they're basically solving the same problem. They have data in SQL,
Yeah.
and they're trying to hydrate Ruby objects via select star strings, and they have to maintain relational integrity, and they can do things where within a request response lifecycle, there's a graph of objects that get hydrated, and there are some mutations that happen, and they have to check whether it's stale, just like we do in JavaScript. But usually it's more forgiving because the request and response lifecycle is so fast that
Yeah.
it's all thrown away. But there's still mutations that happen within that cycle. So you still have to check whether things are stale. You have to go back to the database. You have to figure out how to turn these weird SQL select strings into like a rich graph of objects. So really, if you think about it, it's the same thing. Rails or any server talking to a database is the same thing as a JavaScript client talking to a backend over HTTP API. And the problems that we have to solve of like turning that data into a graph on the client are a lot of the same ones.
Yeah.
And so I think there's still a lot of lessons we could learn from there. And I still really love active record and being able to say, yeah, a user has many posts, user.post.create, and you're not thinking about the SQL at all. They've managed to
Yeah.
abstract away the SQL. Have we managed to abstract away APIs? And we're not even close.
Yeah.
So again, like this is part of it is that we're not working with SQL, which is a standardized query language.
Yeah.
We get to make our own query language with every single project we build. So we make these bespoke APIs, and everyone argues for weeks about
Yeah.
whether a camel case or underscore their keys. So then we have GraphQL comes out, which is solving a good problem,
Yeah.
and is
GraphQL is
scoped
great.
and is a good boundary. That's another example of something you wouldn't think would be a good solution to part of this problem, because it's like, well, it still doesn't tell me what to call things, but at least it tells me, like, given the schema,
Yeah.
here is how you query it. So it
Yeah.
is more standard in that sense, but it still leaves a ton of unanswered questions. But imagine if we didn't need graphical to explore. Imagine if we had
Sure.
richer, data fetching libraries that took care of those details for us. That's the world I want to see. That's the world I believe in.
Yeah. Now you mentioned using Hasura, and if I remember correctly, it's basically a Postgres database service, but then it has a GraphQL endpoint that you can access data through.
It's an open source library that creates an instant real time GraphQL API on top of a Postgres database.
Interesting.
So you can run it locally. You can throw it up on Heroku. That's what I've always done. But you create some tables, and then it introspects them, and then gives you a GraphQL schema that you can use instantly, which is awesome. It's not like the slickest product. It's like, if they had like a product person to nail the onboarding experience, I think it would just be dynamite. But right now there's a few things to get it going. But I think they just came out with like Hasura Cloud, which is like a hosted version I haven't tried yet.
Okay.
They have a button. You just click on it and they set you up on Heroku. So that's pretty cool. And yes, that's much closer to what I like. So I did that for like my little recipe side project.
Which is super cool, by the way. Lots of polish there. I love it.
Thanks. Create some recipes, added some columns, and boom, I was off to the races, just, writing GraphQL and graphical and then pasting it right into my React app. So again, getting that full stack experience of creating recipes and seeing them, but not only having one app, only having my React app and having it have that backend access without having to write server code, without having to write specs for my
Yep.
request to make sure the JSON looks a certain way. So that to me is much, much closer world to where we want to be with. And then Firebase maybe even more so in the sense that, you don't even think about a lot of the stuff that you have to with Hasura.
Yeah, now I know Firebase also offers auth as well. Um,
Yeah.
in the Hasura case, like kind of what would some of your options be for using auth for like a Hasura based application?
Yeah. So Hasura delegates authorization. Um, sorry, authentication and authorization. Authentication is that you are Michael Chan. Authorization is that Michael Chan has the authority
To do
to
certain
visit the ninth
things.
floor and go get the secret files from the FBI closet. So the authentication stuff, Hasura delegates out. And so it says, give me a JWT, or give me an endpoint that I can query to check if you have access, and I'll forward along the headers that came in your request. So they delegate authentication out, and I set that up. I've set that up with a JWT, and I've also set it up with like a Netlify function that
Okay.
uses Firebase, just Firebase auth. So I created a new Firebase project with just auth because Firebase's auth API is so good. It's like import Firebase, Firebase.sign in with email and password. Boom. And that's it. Like that's all you do.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah.
awesome. So once you do that, then you can start making authenticated requests to your Hasura server. And it knows that you're authenticated because either it has a JWT or it has an endpoint it can check. But then for authorization, you add that within the Hasura UI to your table. So you can say recipes, we have different roles. An authenticated role is like an anonymous user and they can read
Hmm.
all recipes, but they can't write. And then,
Interesting.
there's like a user, a logged in user who can write to their own table or whatever, or their own, recipes that belong to them with their user ID, or there's like little checks you can write to do that. So it's pretty awesome. I mean,
Yeah.
it's pretty awesome.
Well, it's really cool that you can separate the services like that because I think that auth is one of the really nice things about Firebase, and then also Netlify has their auth system, and being able to use those, but then also kind of have more fine grained control of your data. That's one thing that's always been
Mm-hmm.
kind of weird about Firebase is that it's a product
It's
owned by
just its own
Google,
thing.
and
Yeah,
Google doesn't
that's
have a great track record.
that's like the main. I mean, Firebase has been around for like 10 years, I think,
Sure, yeah,
right at this point, and they were a startup that was acquired. But you're totally right, and that's no matter how many times I try to tell myself, it's like we were saying before, like why don't you just use Swift UI and do like 100 times the work that you could using all these other things? And it's like it's a hard pill to swallow with Firebase, where the data format is
yep,
proprietary, the storage format is proprietary. You can export it, but the one thing I like about Hasura is your data is just in a Postgres database,
yeah. You can
and
take that
your
anywhere.
React, take it anywhere, and your React app doesn't know it's talking to Hasura. It's
Yeah,
just making GraphQL requests to a GraphQL server that implements a particular API contract. Whereas your React app that talks to Firebase knows it's a Firebase app
yeah,
because you're importing from Firebase, you're using it. So I like the Hasura approach because I can mock it out easily, using something like Mirage or anything, and just say like, yeah, the React app doesn't know. It's just making HTTP. Talk about good abstraction. That's a great abstraction, right? It doesn't matter what's on the other side of that. Whereas Firebase does all this cool stuff with WebSockets, but you don't know any of that. So the boundary moves forward in your application.
yeah. Well, this is a lot of good information. This is probably a good place to close. But I'd love to give you a chance to tell people real quick about Mirage, and then kind of also the things that the places that they can find you about the internet.
Cool. Yeah, Mirage is like main open source project that I work on with Ryan, and we're closing in on 1.0. It's like a API mocking library, and the goal of it is to really help front end developers with this data stuff because we do feel like this is some of the hardest parts
Yeah.
of the whole process. And so, Mirage lets you. We actually just had someone work on a really cool GraphQL integration. So like this is my ideal workflow. I start a React app, either create React app or next. I add Mirage, and I just say, oh, I'm using like Mirage um, Hasura. And then I can just start saying, okay, I have a user, I have many comments, and Mirage is basically going to just take that data model and give me that GraphQL API, and I can start building my React app. I've never had to leave and actually go set up Hasura, but I'm working against a mocked backend that implements the same contract. And it's unbelievable how fast this workflow
Yeah.
is. This is what we were doing back at TED, where we worked and where Mirage came from, where you have this like isolated front end development environment, but it's super fast because you're not dealing with a separate node process. You're not dealing with a service. You can work offline. You can change the responses and tests. And so all of these things that we value, that's kind of what that project's all about. So if that sounds interesting, check out miragejs.com.
Nice. Yeah. And I love that too. I've always loved this notion that, you as a front end developer could actually build the application, start tuning all of the interactions and all that kind of stuff, and then just connect it to data later on. And like,
Exactly.
even at the front of your website, it says like build complete front end features, even if your API doesn't exist. And like, I love that idea. And I think that it's super important for the workflow of React developers.
Yeah.
To like have something that allows them to work with data, not just some like kind of like fake like local storage type of thing.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Like it's so cool too when you work on a project that uses Mirage, you can basically git clone it, yarn install, and yarn start, and you're just working with a whole app. And
Yeah.
it's you can do everything, and you can share that with a product person. Like people who've been using Mirage for years, like Heroku's been one of the original users for like 6 years now because they use Ember, and you can just run the front end, and you don't
Yeah, that's
think about
awesome.
all those nice things that you don't have to think
Yeah.
about setting up. Think about just developing a feature on your front end without having to worry. Like if I want to change myself from like a user to an admin or an
Yeah.
impersonator,
Yeah.
I can just uncomment something right in my front end code base, and like fast refresh just swaps it out. So it's all that kind of stuff.
Oh man,
um,
like I I mean like you're talking my language right now, because like I work in a system and like one of these apps like actually has to communicate to like four different Rails apps, right?
oh
And they
yeah,
all have to
oh
be
yeah.
booted. And if any
And
one of
just
them
for you to change
fails,
some CSS, right?
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
that's ridiculous.
And I have
Yeah,
to like go
yeah.
into the like the database and like flip things on and
Oh,
off. And it's like
absurd.
it's ridiculous. And my computer's just like churning, right? Because it's running
Yeah.
like eight Rails applications.
Yep. Yep. Yep, totally. So yeah, that's exactly the problem that Mirage was built to help solve. Just that beautiful HTTP boundary.
Yeah.
If we can simulate those requests, it's really like a simulator.
Yeah.
It's higher fidelity than just writing like a little Express app because it has the data stuff, and it helps you do all the things that you would normally need or expect from an API. So there's like really easy ways to replicate most backend functionality like out of the box, and then you can write your own stuff. And then the testing is cool too. So like imagine you need to write just a front end test that says this page looks like this when these three services are like this and this one's not. I mean, how would you test that, right? But with Mirage,
Yeah.
you can just say put it in a different state, write in a test, or say assume this route will return a 404, make sure an error page shows. So that's kind of what Mirage is about.
I love that. I love it.
Cool.
So now where can people find more of your kind of like personal work, your journey stuff, via the podcast, etc.?
Yeah, definitely. So Front End First is our podcast. You might find old episodes called the Ember Map podcast because that's what it used to be called. But as we started talking more about this other stuff broadly, we renamed it to Front End First. So that's over at frontendfirst.fm. And we're also on YouTube as well because we do like videos of ourselves talking. And then, I've been like kind of spending a lot of my time lately on my personal YouTube channel. That's just youtube.com/Sam Selikoff. And I was trying to make a video a week. I did that for a while and then I took a break, but that's going to be my goal.
Nice.
And I'm going to try to get into like smaller videos so it's more sustainable. And also I think it's just better.
Yeah.
But this last one was like the opposite of that. I was like, all right, my next video is going to be under 5 minutes. Of course, it's like a 27-minute vlog style thing, but I was just having some fun with it.
Well, I think it's really great because a lot of programmer content is fairly dry. Just kind of like, here are the facts. And like, I'm guilty of the same thing. Like, that's the way that I deliver like content as well. But I'm always struck by the production value of yours because it feels a little bit more like a YouTube style thing where there's a little bit of a narrative. There's some like, little snippets of your life going on in there. It's it's really good stuff.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. It's been fun.
Yeah. Well, hey, Sam, thanks so much for joining us today. This has been a delight. I'm super pleased that we actually got to meet after all of these years of just kind of not quite connecting. So this has been great.
Totally. I know, man. Well, thank you so much. I'm so glad you reached out and I can't wait to meet you in person. Next time this whole thing winds down, if you ever come to New York, got some great cocktail bars we can go
Yes.
to, meet ourselves properly. It'd be fun time. So
Absolutely. I look forward to it.
awesome, man. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
We did it.
Nice.
There we are. Whew. One in the
Let me save this
can.
bad boy. Yeah. Good stuff. Always feels good.
Oh, that was fun.
Super fun, man. Super fun.
I love it.
Yeah, I love that you've been lately talking about these like higher level things almost, It's just that's the stuff that I just eat up. It's like that. It's like the hallway track at a conference.
Yeah.
This is the kind of stuff everyone's talking about. I love it.
Well, it's funny. I don't know. I've been in a little bit of a, I don't know. I kind of I didn't think that I was going to be able to do like a year of this. So like when Michael Jackson was like, "Hey, you want to do this podcast?" I was like, no, I don't think so. Like, I don't think I could like do it for like week, like you were saying with the YouTube thing, right? Like doing something a week, like every week is hard. I mean, especially when you have like real work and like relationships and like everything, like it's non-trivial. Like, and you're doing the podcast and a YouTube channel. Like, it's a lot of freaking work. And,
a lot of freaking work.
Yeah. And so I was like, I don't know if I can do it. And so like my goal was just to like do an episode, like do 52 episodes, right? Like if I can get through a year, then we'll kind of like reevaluate. And I think we're at about 2 now. And I'm kind of trying to figure out like, what does this look like? Because it's been a super fun tool for me to like get to have an opportunity to talk to people and like meet people with intentionality. But I don't know. I've kind of wanted to have a little bit more fun with it, maybe like be a little bit less rigid and just kind of have some chats.
Yeah. Adam says like the same thing about his podcast, where sometimes he, wants to just get on and just chat about what he's been working on. And it's like, it's way easier. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we can do our podcast so regularly.
Yeah.
And even then we miss weeks where, it's just hard.
Yeah.
Especially with COVID time, but more like the document rather than create mentality, where you're just talking about what's top of mind. And that's usually like the most interesting because it's top of mind and it's like it just happened to you, so you're not trying to like force some concept.
Well, a lot of times it's like it's top of mind because there's some type of industry conversation that's happening too, right? Like there's something that happened on Twitter and that's sparking your thinking about a thing, and like it feels like very like real time and relevant. And I think that I've like been feeling like I wanted to do things that were a little bit more like timeless parts of like someone's career. Like for like when the COVID thing first started, like I didn't even bring it up, right? And now it just kind of feels awkward to not do that, right? Like it just feels like I'm like denying some part of like our humanity to like not talk about it.
Yeah. But yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that's interesting. You could do like I mean, the podcast is great, man. I mean, I listen to almost every single episode. So you do a really good job with
thank you.
But I know what you mean, like doing something that's like timeless,
Yeah.
There's definitely a struggle there, like a balance between I think my thinking with the content stuff and us trying to figure out like what our next like business idea is to use like the timely things to like build an audience or just to find people. But then once people want to hear what you have to say, you can teach the higher level things. Like I would love to do a course on like the 5 principles of like UI development. And it's like not about React or Vue, it's about like declarative rendering and like stateful management and all these things, updating after state changes and things like that. So
that's a really interesting.
There could be something you could do there, like almost like a version of your podcast that's like distilling down what you've learned.
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea. Kind of like having the podcast be a little bit more ephemeral, like a little bit more like news, like you're saying. But then, kind of like reserving that other stuff, and like it wouldn't prevent me from also kind of collaborating with people, because I think that's the thing that I really like, is I like just talking with people. That's
what do you, is there something you're thinking about, like if you had to say what would your first like timeless topic be, what like you had on mind?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I mean, the thing that I'm really fascinated in, and I feel like I feel like people, I don't know. I'm super fascinated in like people's resilience, right? So like, you know, how you kind of progress through your career, right? Like how you decide when to like jump off one thing and onto another
Mm,
thing, and like what were the factors that like made that happen. I think those are the things that really fascinate me because they really demonstrate like the resilience of a, you know, a person, and then also kind of like the resilience of technologies, like we were talking about with PHP, right? Like I would
hmm.
have thought like, man, that thing is like down and out, like who gives a shit about PHP anymore? But
Yeah.
like a lot of people give a shit about
Yeah.
PHP.
A lot. I mean, I think it's probably, yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, I remember one day, Michael Jackson was like, he's like, man, I don't even know I do this React stuff. He's like, I should just make WordPress plugins for a living because like I'd probably
Yeah.
make more more money doing that.
Yeah. 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 I know we're so bad at marketing and making money from what we work on. That's
Totally.
pretty interesting, man. I'd be interested in that. But there's a lot of ideas there. You know,
Yeah,
you could work on to make something that's like a little more timeless. You know.
yeah, yeah. Oh man, so you guys having some good success with Mirage, and then also the training stuff through Ember Map.
Yeah, Ember Map is kind of like petered out, I guess. We have like
Oh, should
I don't remember how
I
many.
didn't actually stop streaming. Now that we're talking about your stuff, do you want me to stop streaming?
I don't really care.
Okay,
It's fine.
cool.
We have like we hit a certain threshold with it where it was making up like a quarter of our revenue between the two of us, and the
Okay,
rest was coming from consulting.
cool.
And you know, it felt like it was going to be hard for it to be get to a point where it would like sustain us
Sure.
entirely, just also because it is a function of Ember's popularity, and like Ember never was the most popular
Yep.
framework. Like even at the beginning, I think Angular was more popular
Yep.
than it, and then React came out
Yep.
and just like ate everyone's lunch, right? So um, we love Ember, and our customers love Ember and work on, you know, big Ember apps. I mean, you know, LinkedIn is still powered by Ember. There's a
Yeah.
lot of big sites out there that are powered by Ember. So there's a lot of Ember developers out there, but we just never got to a point where we could like really both go full time on it without doing
Yeah.
consulting stuff. So we've always done it together, and now we're bringing in other people to help us make videos because
Cool.
again, there's not a lot of stuff out there for Ember developers because it is smaller. But um, yeah, I think our goal, again, kind of going back to what I was talking about at the very beginning, is like wanting to make a living from teaching, and like
Yeah.
that being the thing that's most gratifying to me, and also feeling like that's the biggest impact work that I do. And so that's part of it. And then the open source stuff is the other part. So uh, Mirage, we just felt like when we were looking at everything we were doing and spending our time on, was like one of the biggest, most high impact ideas that we had. We still
Yeah.
really believe in it a lot. And like there's so many things that we want to do there, but it's just a question of sustainability. And so we have some ideas around how we could potentially monetize it or get paid to work on it. But at this point, you know, with Ember Map, we were basically like working together, and we had some interest. You know, I had kind of made a name for myself in the Ember community through Mirage and through some conference talks, and had people reach out to me for like consulting help or training. And so I was like, come on, Ryan, let's quit our jobs and like sell videos. And I was like, great. And then we like spent like 6 months building. We did it just completely the wrong way. Spent like 6 months building a website for ourselves, making like the first like video course, and then like going and finding people to like buy it. And like we had some early customers from people who knew us, but it was just like complete opposite. Whereas today I feel like it's much more common knowledge. Like a really solid way to start a business is to like build an audience first,
Yeah.
so that you're both that they know who you are, and you've thought about the distribution,
Yeah.
and you're more in touch with what they're looking for. So we went about Ember Map like the complete wrong way. And so, but it's still, I mean, it still is worked out,
Yeah.
you know, in a lot of ways. And
Well, it's interesting because
so
I know that you and Adam Wathen are friends, and he very much does that the other way, right? Which
yeah,
is
well,
just
like me, totally. I mean, meeting Adam like changed my life. I met him at MicroConf 2 years ago. I think Swix was there too, but that was just like, oh man, mind revelation after
yeah.
mind revelation. He gave this great talk about his you know, his courses that he does, and he has a really good market. Unlike most of us who are coders,
Yeah.
he has a really good intuition about what's important when it comes to sustaining your work,
Yeah.
and how you're actually going to like sell something which involves like both making sure it's meeting someone's need, but also that like they can find out about you.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I still think most of us, unfortunately, have this like build it and they will come idea. We like spend way too much time on the wrong
Totally,
stuff.
yeah.
It's just so bad. So we did not want to do that this time around when we decided like, okay, Ember Map is going to be tough for us to like, you know, make it work for both of us full time. What's going to be the next thing that we do? Because we can
Yeah.
always do consulting, but our goal is not to do that. And so we have some ideas for things we would like to see in the world, or pro features for Mirage, all this sorts of thing. But at this point, we're very much in this like explore phase. You know,
Yeah.
it's like explore, exploit, and we're in the explore phase, trying to find out what hits a nerve. And so it's been fun with YouTube and just my Twitter account, seeing like, oh wow, people really seem to like animations,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
people seem to like Next.js a lot.
Yeah.
People really seem to like Next. So that's been something fun to learn.
Yeah, it's very elusive, man. It's like it's so weird, right? Like all this stuff. Like you
Yeah.
just never know what people are going to be super excited about.
Yeah. I mean, Tailwind only exists because Adam was live streaming his work, and people kept asking him for those little utilities that he was copying from
Yeah, yeah.
project to project. So that's like a, I think, a really good example of this idea of like, is just like paying attention. This again, being like humble about like what is going to be the best solution for
Yeah.
people's problems that you want to serve, and tinkering and experimenting a lot so that you're like increasing your luck surface area, and you're paying attention to their needs and what they're saying.
Yeah.
So
Man, that idea of humility is really hard, right? Because it's like we feel like we know, like all of us at some level feel like we know what's best for other people, right? Like if you just
yeah,
went through it this way, or you thought about it this way, or you learned this thing, and that's just not, it's not the
it's
way
like a
life
mix
works.
of yeah, it's like a mix of humility, but also you do have to have a vision in some sense.
Yeah.
You have to have good taste.
Yeah.
And when I think of DHH, do you think of a humble person? Probably not the first word that comes to your mind. And I absolutely love DHH. I have like such
Totally.
a programmer crush on him. But like I do think he does pay attention to things, and it's not all like I mean, there are some problems, like, and he has pushed some people away because he's been too top down, right?
Sure.
So there's a balance. It's a balance, but I think a lot of us, the pendulum is too far the other way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we would do better to, pay attention to our users and tinker and experiment.
Yeah. Man, that is something that I'm just trying to get better at. Like, I mean, even just this is an experiment in that, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
just that live streaming and like just seeing
Totally.
what people get excited about. Because,
I think it's great.
like, I mean, like you said, like that Tailwind thing, it's like, that's not like, Tailwind is not like a novel concept, right? But like it was that community, the people who were like excited about like Adam's work and like trusted him, that actually like built that product, or built it as a product, right? Because these things have existed before, but like not to that level as a product.
It's the execution,
Yeah.
in combination with the community. And I think Adam could probably build 10 things like Tailwind that solve problems that he's run into before, in such a way that would really meet the needs of the people, and also that he would execute well
Yeah.
on with
Yep.
polish and commit to all the way. Like, he doesn't really work on things without going all in on them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, that's another thing I value. And so last year when we decided to work on Mirage, because Mirage had grown, significant in the Ember community, but as we were doing more of different style things, we were just still doing Ember, but we were also doing React and stuff. It was like, all right, what's the status of Mirage? It takes a lot of time to maintain. And it's either we're all going all in on it, or we're going to like put it in complete maintenance mode.
Yeah.
Right? So we were like, all right, all in, what does that mean? It means making it agnostic to frameworks. And so that's kind of been our main, like, of our OSS time, that's been our focus.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. It's hard, man. Focus is really hard, focusing on the right thing, but I think it's better to focus on the right thing and do a bang up job of it than try to do too many things and just move an inch in every direction. I mean, we've been guilty of that like so much over the last 3 years since basically starting our business. It's hard. It's really hard to focus.
That's the other thing too, right? Like we have a very short attention, like a lot of us developer types have a very short attention span, and it's just like, oh well, I spent a week on this and no one got excited about it, so on to the next thing.
Yeah. And it's funny because I know that happens. And so now, like, when there is, it's so funny how fast people are like quick to suggest or recommend like a GitHub project.
Yeah.
And like, maybe hopefully it's a sign of maturity, but maybe it's a sign of being jaded, jaded old developer. But if I look at a project, even if it does exactly what I need, and I see it's just, there's like no one around, or even if it's like one excited person, it's like, you haven't proven to me yet that this is worth taking on,
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, it's like fewer better things, fewer higher quality things.
I agree.
And I think if you're going to decide to make something for other people to either use or buy, you want to have that, embrace that same mentality and say, like, I'm all in on this one thing, and it's going to be like the best version of this I can do. That's anyways how we like to think about it.
Yeah. I love that. Love, love, love. Well, hey, I got to get to work. Yeah. And I know you got
Sounds
friends to
I'm gonna
drink
go get
with.
A drink. You should not do that, man. You should just, I mean, for me, it's like if I could work or go out, I'm gonna just go out.
Go. I love
of course,
it.
I have the choice. That's sometimes a problem, but
I know, right? I know.
Cool, man. Hey, It was so good to meet you and talk with you, man. I really look forward to a day we can meet in person. I think it's going to be fun.
Yeah, same. This has been an absolute delight, and I'd love to kind of get you on the show again sometime. Let maybe a couple quarters go by, but then just hang out again and just talk about stuff. So this has been
sweet,
super fun.
Yeah, maybe we'll have a little Mirage React UI component that lets you like control your server. We've been talking about that in the UI, and like change the data or like the timing of the responses. That'd be a fun one to talk about.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about Mirage, because I think that idea is really interesting. And I think specifically, like right now, like I've been trying to figure this piece of it out for like our teams, because it's just so hard.
We should pair on it and see. I'll be able to tell if like Mirage would actually be a good fit for what you're doing.
Yeah. That'd be awesome, because it's like
anytime, man.
Yeah. I'd love to get your feedback on it, because it's just insufferable now. It's like just every day is like a battle, and you're just like,
oh man,
like what am I doing? This is not fun.
Yeah, we should definitely pair on it.
Yeah, cool.
Let's coordinate over Twitter, but yeah, I can jump on anytime, man.
Cool. Awesome.
All
right, I got kids in here now.
Nice.
That's the real sign.
Looking good with the blue background, man. Nice to meet you again. Hey, have a good day.
Nice to meet you. Always a pleasure. Yeah, talk to you soon. Bye.